So where's Rommel then? Yeah, right. No, I remember. But okay, who's in charge? He what? He's dead. Well, was he shot or what? Uh-huh. While holding on to what? Wow. Oh, no, I would not have guessed that. Okay. See ya. October 30th, 1942. You have your battle plan. You have to stick to it. It involves suicidal bayonet charges against machine guns. You lose a lot of men. The next day, the order is for the same battle plan against the same defenders using the same tactics. What do? Well, this week, if you're the Japanese on Guadalcanal, you do exactly the same thing. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, crossed signals messed up a Japanese attack at Guadalcanal. The fighting for Stalingrad's factory district peaked and then ebbed again, and in North Africa, the Allies launched their long-awaited offensive against the Axis forces. This week, we really see two full phases of the Second Battle of El Alamein. The initial infantry attacks in the north, that began the night of the 23rd, go well at first, but slow down over the night. And though a few objectives are taken by dawn the 24th, the minefield itself, the Devil's Garden, is still full of British armor and infantry stuck together. The enemy defenses are deeper than anyone on Allied command has guessed. British Commander Bernard Montgomery orders that even if the infantry is totally stuck, the armor must fight its way through. They have, though, wrecked communications between the Axis front lines and headquarters. So Axis Commander Georg Stumm heads to the front to see what's happening. His car comes under attack, though, and his aide is killed. Stumm starts to get out just as the driver speeds off. So he's clinging to the side of the car when he has a heart attack and dies. Wilhelm Thoma takes over, and Erwin Rommel is recalled from his sickbed in Germany. Adolf Hitler himself calls and asks him to return to North Africa. Allied attacks continue all day the 24th, and as the afternoon wanes, 2nd Armored Brigade from 1st Armored Division breaks through into the clear. They are immediately attacked by the 15th Panzers, but guess what? This is what Monty wants. Keep the enemy armor busy while eliminating their infantry. The other armor from 10th Corps, 10th Armored Division, cannot break through, though, at Pereira all day, and Corps Commander Herbert Lumsden calls Monty that night to tell him it is suicidal for them to keep trying in the face of anti-tank weapons and uncleared minefields. Montgomery not only insists they keep trying, but says that anyone opposed will be removed from command. Lumsden does as ordered, and does lose a lot of tanks, but by 8 a.m. the 25th, his forward units are a couple of kilometers beyond the minefields and in touch with 2nd Armored Brigade on their right. On the 25th, the diversionary attacks by 13th Corps in the south are stopped. They have certainly tied down the 21st Panzers, but Monty doesn't want them to take unnecessary casualties. What's supposed to happen next, according to the plan, which we saw last week, is that the Axis infantry is now to be crushed by 30th and 13th Corps, while the Axis armor breaks itself attacking Lumsden's armor. Well, this can't work, in large part because most of 10th Corps is not clear of the mines. So Montgomery changes the game and wants the Australians to attack in the far north, while the 1st Armored heads west and tries to sabotage enemy supplies. The Australians advance in the night, as do the New Zealanders and South Africans, but the armor cannot. So the plan is foiled again. Here is 8th Army situation on the 26th then. 30th Corps continued to attack, but its thrusts were becoming weaker. The situation was by no means unsatisfactory, although it was not as good as Montgomery had hoped and predicted. His armor, though not still clear of the enemy defenses, was in positions from which it could protect the infantry and deal with German counterattacks, which was, after all, its main function at this stage. His infantry, meanwhile, was gradually breaking up the enemy divisions by limited attacks on narrow fronts. In the process, however, the momentum of the offensive had fallen away. On the 27th, Rommel brings the 21st Panzers north and attacks with 150 of them towards Kidney Ridge, a daring counterattack before he can be ground down by attrition. But he loses 50 tanks and is stopped. Most of what he loses, actually, he loses to the Snipe Detachment, a 300-man British group with 19 anti-tank guns that find themselves suddenly in the hot seat. Rommel prepares again the 28th to attack, but the Desert Air Force flies in and hits his assembly points, wrecking the attack. But still, with the whole Africa Corps now opposite his northern corridor, Montgomery cannot break out there. So he plans to develop the Australian attacks in the north into a major thrust towards Sidi Rahman. Rommel, being a fairly smart cookie, figures this is what the new plan is and brings the 90th Light Division there the night of the 28th to foil that plan. But this has another consequence. See, his best armor and mobile forces are now all together in the northern sector of the front, right? Well, I will let David Braddock poetically describe what Rommel does not realize. That the corset, whose strings had been loosened by the move of 21st Panzer, was now completely undone, and that the German formations no longer held the Italians together. So on the 29th, Monty orders the breakout attack. This is Operation Supercharge, and is to go off against where the line is held by the Italians alone, north of the original northern corridor. The Australians are to continue their attacks and tie down 90th Light, while the 151st, 152nd, and 9th Armored Brigades and the New Zealand Division will cut a path for the 1st, 7th, and 10th Armored Divisions to break out into the open desert. Once there, they will attack and destroy the Deutsche Afrika Korps in open battle, while armored cars will cut off enemy supply. This is a huge change in tactics for Montgomery, ordering a mobile battle, but he's going to go for it. The attack begins tonight, and the week ends as the Australians are fighting towards the coast. That Allied attack begins at the end of the week, but a Japanese one begins at the beginning. Harukichi Hyakutaki's attack goes off the 24th. The Japanese plan is to take Henderson Field, the American air base. Marine scouts, though, have spotted the enemy along the Lunga River, and Lieutenant Colonel Chesty Puller's 1st Battalion 7th Marines are on the alert. They've cut fields of fire in the grass clearing for their machine guns and hung the barbed wire at the perimeter with shell fragments so they can hear the enemy coming in the dark. And come he does at 9:30 in the evening. The first Japanese wave is hit not only by Marine machine guns, but by the semi-automatic rifles of the Americal Army Regiment's 3rd Battalion backing up the Marines. The rain does not help the Japanese advance either. In fact, the night is a total disaster for them, losing 1,000 men in what are essentially suicidal charges, but causing 70 casualties for the Americans. The first assaults had failed for the same reasons that had defeated Ichiki and Kawaguchi's earlier attacks. The Japanese had not yet appreciated that the bamboo spear tactics of the banzai charges were no match for the connected fire of American machine guns and mortars. Worse for the Japanese, in the confusion of battle, a spotter mistakes a flare for the signal that they have broken through to the airfield. That news is passed on to Hyakutaki, and then to Rabaul, and then on to Gunichi Mikawa's cruiser fleet, who are waiting in the slot for the word to take control of the waters of Iron Bottom Sound after the airfield is in Japanese hands. And they move in. And as if to highlight the staggeringly bad communication between the Japanese Army and Navy, he is not called back even when Rabaul realizes the signal is premature. Fortunately for him, morning rain delays the Cactus Air Force from taking off for a few hours. Unfortunately, when it ends, he's driven off and loses a cruiser. The Japanese assault Puller's positions again the night of the 25th, and with the same terrible results, another 1,000 men dead. John Costello writes that Puller himself interrogates a captive Japanese soldier as to why they keep on suicidally attacking here instead of finding a weaker sector. And the soldier says that the attack has been so meticulously planned, there is no thought of deviating from Hyakutaki's strict orders. And it cost them 1/3 of the Sendai division and half the officers. And by the time the survivors have marched the 5 days through the jungle to get back to their base, their casualties are around 50%. Hyakutaki, though, is not giving up. He still has like 15,000 men on the island, and figures that with one more division, he can do the job. He asks Rommel to begin bringing in the 12,000 men of the 38th Division. But the Japanese are scoring a big victory at sea this week in the Battle of Santa Cruz. See, 4 battleships and carriers and light carriers, Shokaku, Zuikaku, Zuiho, and Junyo, and cruisers and destroyers support the Guadalcanal operation. The carriers are to send planes to Henderson Field once it has been captured. Once again, though, like at Midway, the Japanese force is split into several groups, and the battleships are not with the carriers. Junyo and her 55 planes are also separate from the rest of the carriers. The Americans have just one battleship here, South Dakota, but it is with carriers Enterprise and Hornet to give AA cover. The Japanese have 212 planes total, and the Americans 171. The morning of the 26th, 16 Dauntless dive bombers leave Enterprise just before 5:30. They sight 3 enemy carriers at 6:50 and put a crater in the flight deck of light carrier Zuiho, who is forced to retire. Both sides launch strikes around 7 a.m. The Japanese attack, 60 planes strong from Shokaku, does not spot Hornet's 29 planes heading for the Japanese carriers. Battleship South Dakota, 2 cruisers and 8 destroyers protect Enterprise, while 4 cruisers and 7 destroyers ring Hornet. The Japanese come in low over the horizon, break through the combat air patrol, and in a 10-minute strike, leave Hornet ablaze and dead in the water. The Japanese planes have a longer range than the American planes, who are launched at their max range, so there is no extra fuel to make up a coordinated American attack. So Hornet's plane's eye for an eye attack on Shokaku fails to sink her, but does wreck the flight deck. A second wave of Japanese planes does heavy damage to Enterprise. But a lot of those planes and a later third strike from Junyo are shot down by the mighty guns of Battleship South Dakota. The Allied task forces withdraw to the south, but Shuichi Nagumo launches a 4th strike. It finds the crippled Hornet being towed away and does a bunch more damage to her. She will finally be sunk at night. This is a Japanese victory, and the damaged Enterprise is now the only American carrier in the Pacific. But Japanese aircrew losses are so severe that carrier Zuikaku, though undamaged, is pretty much out of action anyway. No attack on Henderson Field will now be worthwhile. In fact, the Japanese lose 100 planes this day. However, Japanese high command in Tokyo thinks that this victory is greater than it actually is, since apparently Japanese pilots report sinking 4 carriers and 3 battleships, and high command takes it at face value and holds a victory parade through Tokyo. One bright spot for the tactical losers of the battle is how effective the new Bofors guns are at AA work. And also, the Japanese combined fleet is now withdrawn to Truk for refitting and replenishing. So the Japanese are losing the Guadalcanal War of Attrition on land, at sea, and in the skies. They're also losing on the Kokoda Trail. On the 29th, the Australians forced them from their positions at Aora. The next day, they reach Alola, 10 miles south of Kokoda itself. The Axis are advancing, though, in the Caucasus. Ewald von Kleist's 1st Panzer Army was unable to break out of the Mozdok bridgehead in September, and he ordered his troops to prepare for winter on the Terek River front. But he's finally actually gotten reinforcements, and he thinks he's got one shot to take something big before winter. Maybe not Grozny, but Ordzhonikidze. That city is the end of the Georgia military highway, and that's where the Soviet reinforcements from the Transcaucasian front keep arriving from. So capturing that would sabotage Semyon Budyonny's ability to launch Soviet winter counteroffensives. Kleist plans to bypass 9th Army and its strong defenses, attack Pyotr Kozlov's weaker 37th Army, and go around the enemy to Ordzhonikidze. On the 25th, the Luftwaffe hits Kozlov's headquarters and knocks out his communications. Then, the Romanian 2nd Mountain Division starts crossing the Baksan. This diversion is to get Kozlov looking to the north when the main attack is coming from the east. On the 26th, the 13th and 23rd Panzer Divisions from Eberhard von Mackensen's Panzer Corps attack at 5:30 a.m. and overwhelmed the 257th Rifle Division, the 13th enveloping Nalchik from the southeast and linking up with the Romanians heading south towards Argudan. This classic blitzkrieg cauldron envelopment takes Nalchik the 28th and 2 Soviet divisions. By the end of the week, the 37th Army is withdrawing into the mountains and the door to Ordzhonikidze seems wide open. The street fighting in Stalingrad is of another character entirely. Behind the forward assault groups, German and Soviet squads were locked in protracted house-to-home fighting and wrapped in the heavy caustic stench of hot metal, charcoal, burned brick, and the dead rotting beneath the rubble. In each embattled house, the German dead lay strewn in the cellars and on the landings. Inside, the Russians held off the Germans with grenades, automatic fire, bayonets, and fighting knives. Every room turned into a small fort, with weapons pointing through firing points, holes knocked in walls for observation or passage. The Russians and Germans crashed into each other across a landing or through an attic in fierce spasms of hand-to-hand combat, usually shrouded in dust, bursts of fire, and exploding grenades, which brought down the plaster and timber in cascades. If the Germans took part of a building by day, at night the Russians returned, feet bound in sacking to deaden the noise, or swinging along the shattered roof beams, grenades and light weapons at the ready. Vasily Chuikov's Soviet 62nd Army has a kind of a process for taking buildings by night, storm groups. These are led by an assault party, which is around 8 men with machine pistols and grenades, and some hand-to-hand weapon like knives or sharpened spades. They break into a building and then fire off a flare that summons the reinforcement party, right? These parties have heavier weapons like machine guns, mortars, maybe anti-tank weapons even, explosives too, and sappers to use them, tunneling under German positions or trenching to within grenade range. The 26th, Vasily Sokolov's 45th Division begins crossing the Volga to take position between Krasny Oktyabar and Barikady to block the German advance to the Volga and the boat landings. But this day, the 62nd Army crossing, the last lifeline to the East Bank, comes under heavy and sustained fire. The Germans were just 400 meters away. Seeing this, their soldiers burst out cheering. With this last river crossing out of action, they were convinced the 62nd Army would be unable to hold out any longer and that the battle would be over. Instead, it inspires the defenders to even greater action. Chuikov launches a counterattack the 27th to gain time for the whole division to cross. His attacks are successful enough to give them a day's respite from assaults, and 62nd Army holds out the rest of the week. John Erickson writes that by the 29th, the gigantic 15-day German offensive is dying away. The next day, there are no attacks on the Soviet lines in the city. To the south, however, Mikhail Shumilov's 64th Army is on the offensive. At 10 a.m. the 25th, his right flank starts a battle that lasts the rest of the week. They do manage to take the southern edge of Kuporoznoye, but that's really it for all of their efforts. And the week ends with the German attacks slowing in Stalingrad but increasing in the Caucasus, Japanese suicidal attacks on Guadalcanal, and perhaps the beginning of big Allied success in North Africa. Back to Stalingrad. Friedrich Paulus's German Sixth Army has taken the tractor plant, split the Soviet 62nd Army, and isolated its right flank, but it still fights, and the firestorm has not pushed it from the west banks of the Volga. I'm going to end today with more John Erickson, a direct quote this time, and he can be pretty poetic when he wants to be, right? What Paulus had just done, he could never again repeat on this fearful scale, using his army as a battering ram. To the world, German propaganda trumpeted and bellowed over the triumph on the Volga. In truth, Paulus had impaled himself and his bone-weary soldiers on the spikes of Stalingrad. Through their mists of blood and screens of smoke, Chuikov and his men saw this. They had fended off catastrophe, admittedly with only meters to spare, but they knew at this point that Soviet troops were winning the battle. If you found the Battle of Santa Cruz interesting, then check out our 5-hour, 10-part miniseries on Pearl Harbor if you have not already. We are quite proud. Well, we're extremely proud of it, right?
Yeah.
It was really good. You can, it's groundbreaking. You can check out episode 1 right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Stumpy Meh. Yep, Stumpy Meh. Stumpy and the Army are our major source of finance so that we can do all of this stuff that we do. So join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.